Greetings, mortals, and welcome to this video on Persona 5.
So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of depth in this video, but I thought I'd give a few pointers for people who are going to play the game and would like to have a slightly easier time, but don't want a lot of spoilers that like a detailed guide would give them. I will not refer to anybody, like any characters by name. I will only refer to social links that have mechanics that are important by their arcana, and I'll be talking about a few of the mechanical operations around the game, a few of the mechanics about test scores, and I will be referring to two separate personas by name. Aside from that, it's going to be mostly just mechanical issues, but there are going to be three mechanics that are directly tied to social link that I will mention. So I'm going to get right into it. The first thing is that there are some social links that seem to always raise. Both Sun and Moon seem to always raise. They don't need um, any spend times, and they don't need you to have a matching persona. Aside from that, I would always recommend having a matching persona. But mechanically speaking, maxing your social links in this game seems to be much easier than in previous games. I wasn't following any guides, including like answer sheets for the different like social links, because I didn't want any spoilers at all. Which meant that obviously a lot of the times that I was raising my social links, I was giving bad answers and things like that. And I still only was, I think, about four like total ranks for maxing every single character. There were only like a couple of there were two that I didn't have maxed. Anyway, so let's see. When you get the highest score in your test, you do not get a free spend time with all of your social links that are in the school. So that's kind of an important mechanic change to consider. The test scores I don't think are really that relevant, kind of as a result. So the timing for test scores I don't think is that relevant unless you want to max every test because you want to be the best, like no one ever was. Um, so there are two social links that leveling them up quickly can help you a lot. And there's one that leveling it up quickly can cause problems for you in preventing you from farming certain materials as easily as you'd like. So, Fortune and Temperance both save you time. Fortune can save you an immense amount of time because it gives you the ability to basically use the shrine mechanic of getting a spend time with someone without using a time slot at all. It just has a financial cost and can be done once per, I think, once per day. Um, so it's very powerful. It can save you a lot of time if you get it done. If you get fortune raised early, it'll trivialize how difficult it is to get some of these, to get all of the social links maxed. Temperance saves you a little bit of time as well, but not in the same way. I won't go into it too in depth. But basically, they can save you the needing to do things that you wouldn't want to, and give you the ability to get more stat boosts, basically. So anyway, another thing from a combat perspective. Oh, sorry. The third social link that I think can be problematic is if you max out, or sorry, not max out. If you raise your chariot to rank 7, it unlocks an insta-give mechanic that allows you to basically just insta-give an enemy if you ambush them. And it never works on high level enemies, and it always works on enemies that are 10 levels below you. And 10 levels seems like a large margin, but there are several dungeons in the mid game where enemy levels do not meaningfully increase. While your level is increasing, only the highest level enemies in the dungeon are any higher than the enemies from the previous two dungeons. And the consequence of that is that you end up fighting enemies that are legitimately 10 levels below you. There are certain thieves' tools that are very valuable to create, and the earlier you make them, the better. And it is troublesome if you can't farm the materials because the only enemy in the entire dungeon that drops it is 12 levels below you. And so you have to let them ambush you if you want to fight them because you can't fight them if you ambush them. You could do a neutral or whatever, but it's a neutral is not substantially a substantial improvement over an ambush because with an ambush they actually have more enemies. So in terms of combat, one thing that is important to recognize is if you spend the first action running, if that's the first thing that you do, you'll always escape if you ambushed the enemy. You'll always escape, not necessarily immediately, but before the enemies get their turn. And that allows you to try to flee on the first turn. You usually do not actually flee immediately, but sometimes you do. But then on the next two turns, you can then start launching attacks at the enemy and seeing if you can exploit a weakness and figure out what it has. Again, if you're not using a guide or something to just know what all the weaknesses are in advance, that can be very useful when facing off with enemies that look like they're reasonably strong. Particularly because sometimes you run into very long time periods between save points. Anyway, let's see. Next thing is that once you get level 34, the game is basically over. Almost all the difficulty leaves the game as soon as you hit level 34 because you get access to Arahabaki. So Arahabaki is a persona that starts at its starting initial level with Makarakarn, which gives you a reflecting shield, so it repels all magic attacks. And in addition, it passively has repel fizz and repel gun. So Arahabaki has a weakness to psi and nuclear, but there is a persona that you get earlier called Suiki that has access to null nuke very early. So you'll already have access to null nuke before you get Arahabaki. And for me, when I was making the Arahabaki, I just casually had null nuke on everything already because why would I not propagate the null nuke? So by propagating the null nuke, you can end up with an Arahabaki that nulls nuke. Psi is something that enemies very rarely use. Even enemies that have Psi as an attack type usually have a status effect oriented AI, which means that they will try to inflict, sleep or fear or some other status effect on you, and then they will use psi attacks on you afterward. And even if you're weak against psi, they will not exploit that weakness usually. Okay, so there are some enemies that are even worse in that regard. So in terms of leveling, I do suggest that you use your SP as efficiently as possible during the first couple of dungeons, especially if you're trying to get through the dungeons in the minimum number of days spent at the dungeon. But once you get access to Arahabaki, the entire game is so easy that you don't need to worry about that anymore. It's very easy to just cleave through. I did make sure that because the final boss fights in these games tend to be, multi-part and very long, and I've been traumatized by the final boss of Persona 3. So what I did do was during the final dungeon, I did some leveling there, and I think that that's the best place to level if you are going to level, unless you want to exploit a bug involving the Reaper. Because that's probably, I don't know if it's actually, I don't think it's faster. Honestly, I don't think that fighting the Reaper is faster because it takes too long for the Reaper to show up. By the time the Reaper shows up, you could have fought other enemies multiple times. But I could be wrong. I guess as you get higher level. But anyway, so the enemies that I would recommend that you fight, if you want to make it so that the end game goes smoothly, you don't have to worry about the last few fights in the game, is after the first sub boss in the final dungeon, you'll see multiple red enemies, and if you have Arahabaki, that if you have Arahabaki at all, you can completely trivialize those enemies. But you don't want to ambush them and get your turn. Your turn. What you actually want is to allow them to ambush you. If you ambush them, you'll end up fighting one enemy that's worth about 4,000 experience. If you allow them to ambush you, you'll fight two of that same enemy and a third enemy that's worth about 3,000. So you'll end up getting about 11,000 experience, which is just a massive amount of experience, and it does slow down after you hit about level 90. But at level 90, with with Yoshitsune and Michael, I for the final boss, it was just debilitate and then charge and then whatever my physical attack was, and that was it. That was the entire strat, was just doing that over and over and over again, and it was very very easy. So so once you get Arahabaki, you can trivialize the vast majority of the game, and then when you start to have to worry about like super crazy almighty attacks, you have access to debilitate, and the game just gets much easier. Um, in terms of boss fight strategy, because there are a lot of bosses that use Tarukaja. There are a lot of bosses that have this Heat Riser move that can be a little painful for you. My suggestion is, if you bring the party with you, that would give you. I had Rakunda on my Arahabaki, so I mostly just sat in the Arahabaki because a lot of bosses have physical attacks. And I would just use Rakunda, and then I brought the party member that has access to Tarunda, which drops the enemy's attack power, and then I had a third party member who had Ma Rakukaja. That ensures that you don't run into a problem with the protagonist getting one shot, and if the protagonist isn't getting one shot, then it's pretty easy to take down all the bosses in the game. Anyway, I think this is a long enough guide. So thank you everyone for watching. It has been a pleasure to make this little guide for you. I hope it's been useful to you. If it has been useful to you, just leave a comment, because I don't usually make this kind of video. But if people enjoy these videos, I might make some more of these just quick guides to various games. So later, folks.